welcome again to John Broons, the Family Business Guy. In part one earlier on, we were speaking about some of the things that might happen and in the circumstances around you being hit by a bus. So what would happen if you were hit by a bus? And towards the end of the session, we talked about money, or we started talking about money. So a couple of the things that come to mind, who besides you can access the money? So if you were hit by a bus and you went around, who do you know that actually has accessibility into those accounts? And what checks and balances do you have in place to ensure those people pay the bills and they don't pay themselves? They were the last couple of things that I spoke about. Some of the other things that you might want to be aware of, just to check off as a checklist or a to-do list, is who else has authorization on your bank accounts? Is it just the financial controller? Is it a partner, a married partner, a business partner, kids, other associates? How do you pay wages? Does it need 2 signatories on a cheque, or are they electronic key fobs? And how do you keep track of that electronic key fob? Is it on your keychain, so you take it to work with you or you don't? It's a challenge to keep track of that, and you need to have somebody aware as to what you would want to happen in case of an emergency, in case you were hit by a bus. So the next question I have when we're talking about money is from an authorization point of view with your bank. Goodness gracious me, you've been working with the bank for many years, trading successfully, and you get hit by a bus. You don't have time to go and withdraw your signature, and you may need signatures on documents, on loan agreements, leases. What happens then? Where do you go to when those documents change, or when you're not around? From an authorization point of view, who else is authorised to access your bank account? Generally, in my experience, my understanding is that once you're dead, nobody should be able to access your bank account. And if that's a business case and you have employees and you need to pay them, and your bank account is frozen because you're the only one that can actually pay those bills, how do you actually pay the wages? So what do you need to put in place to look after that situation? So those kinds of things with money, they're really important. They're critical to the day-to-day of the business. And really, when you try and measure the risk that you are facing, when you're dealing with these kinds of thoughts, what happens if, really it's quite an opportune time to think about how risk affects all other areas of your business as well. But that's a separate conversation we'll have at a different time. If I go on to another subject, one of the other things in the book, the next point, about if you were hit by a bus, who knows the access codes, the passwords into your computer, into your software packages, not just your bank accounts, but the access code just to turn on the internet, the passwords to get into internet banking or different websites that you have software put on, just operating your own website. If you do it yourself, or if you have other people that do the work for you, they would need permissions and they would need authorizations. A domain residence. If you have a website, it's hosted on a domain somewhere, and these companies really control things by the administrator. Are you the administrator? And if you are, what's your password or access code written down? Or is it documented somewhere in a secure place? Some computers these days, people are using software packages like LastPass, where the computer generates its own password for you, but you need to remember one password to access all of your passwords that are generated by the computer. So it's easy for you to remember one password, but not hundreds, and these software packages work well for you. But still, where do you keep that one critical name, number, gobbledygook sentence, trick phrase? There can be any amount of different codes that you'll have for that. Other things that might need access codes would be social media websites. The Facebook stuff that you might or might not use, Instagrams, the WhatsApps, Vibe, they all carry different passwords, or I'm assuming different passwords. So really, technologically, it's a risk. There's an opportunity for other people to steal this information and use it against you or use it in place of you to take advantage. So where do you keep these things and how do you store them safely? I know it sounds a little bit old-fashioned, but have you got a safe at your place of work? Do you have one in the office wall? Do you have it in the floor of the office? Is it fireproof? Does it have a combination or does it have a key? Who knows the codes? What happens if you're the only person that knows the code to access the safe where a lot of valuable documents are? Who knows what the documents might be? They could be property ownership, they could be leases, they could be titles, they could be cash, it could be jewellery. What happens if you got hit by a bus? Goodness gracious me, I'd love to know where my stuff was and how I could get into it. Lots of stories about safes. And I suppose I mentioned keys to safes. So if you lose the key, or if you've got the key to the safe on your key ring, that's an easy one because that's generally an old style safe. But keys in general, are they labelled? Are they tagged? Where are the spares? And the keys to what? Could be the keys to the car, or cars, or vehicles, trucks, buses. I don't know how many vehicles you have in your business, but they may not be just business keys that you have. Keys could be to lock up storage facilities. Keys could be to an apartment you have in another state. The keys could be to petty cash tins. Plant and equipment, forklifts, wheel loaders. Keys can be for so many different things. To share a personal story, my father-in-law, when he passed away, just a small Lockwood lock key was sitting on his ink blotter on his desk when he passed. Now, the family have spent months trying all of the locks in the house, all of the locks in the holiday house, all of the locks that we have found at his place of work, and we have not been able to identify this one key that was so important to him that it sat right in the middle of his ink blotter on his desktop in his office. It wasn't tagged. How are we going to resolve this one? To this day, and he's been gone for a long time, to this day, we still don't know. Keys are pretty unusual things. But then company cars. Spare keys to those. Where do they live? I'm sure you've probably got a place, but who can access them again? Something happens to you, people might utilise those cars for all sorts of things. They might keep them for a period of time when they should be returning them to the place of work. What are the policies and procedures that you might have documented? So I think that's a reasonable group of questions about keys, about security, about risk, things that you might want to consider to build yourself a little checklist, a to-do list, and start ticking these things off as you work through them. If you were hit by a bus, more questions come to mind. I've always got questions. So maybe I'll stop right here, we'll take a break, and I'll have a glass of water, and I'll come back to you shortly.
Great conversation you're having, John, about hit by a bus and what would a business owner do. And as you were talking about security and about keys and about processes and about safes and so forth, I'm thinking to myself, I wonder how many of us have bought a business. And it's like the owner's been hit by a bus because they've run away with your money, they've got your money. But can this be a very useful checklist for buying a business to see what you're stepping into, so you're mitigating risks of stepping into something and not knowing where things are?
Very definitely, yes. If you are buying a business, you're going to want to know what you're actually buying. Some people spend time working in those businesses, learning the ropes, getting a feel for the customers, just seeing, yes, this is something that I want to do, but they don't know all of the little secret things that will go on. They don't know of all the little deals that might be happening between staff, keys, safes, hiding places. It's a real, it can be a point of contention, I'll put it that way, of how do we deal with these things. And I am a list maker sometimes, a lot of the time. So this book came about, the booklet came about principally because I wanted a list to work to, the what if list.
Now, you bought your family business. So I'm going to ask you a question. When you stepped through the doors as the new owner, could that list be completed on day one? Because you'd actually worked in it, so, or was that part of the motivation for the booklet you've got?
There were a lot of things that I had to address when I bought the business, and on the day of transition, there were a huge amount of things that I had to go through. So the list that I had was a bank accounts list, signatories, company secretary, documentation both for the any loan agreements that I had, titles of property that I'd purchased, all of these documents going into safes. Which safe did I put it in? There was a very old safe that had a key lock that was the size of a small room, and inside that safe that was bricked three sides around like an old bank safe was another old safe, again with a different key. And I needed to checklist that I had keys to all of these things. I had to know where they were. I had to know who had access to them. I had to know the documentation from banking, from company secretarial documents, trust documents, where all of these things were. Because I was putting new things in place, and some of the old things that I was finding, I had to then return to the accountants for them to process and pass on to the old past owners.
Yeah. John, when you first stepped in, how did you decide who was going to be your right-hand man or woman or person, if we're being politically correct these days? How do you decide who's also going to have that same information as you've got or access? How did you make up your mind around that challenge?
For me, it was reasonably simple. Because it was already a family business, the company secretary and our financial controller already existed. So he was already a trusted person within the family group. He and I had had a number of conversations prior to me taking over the business, and I had to be sure that he was happy to join me in my new business, and he would then have to relinquish different positions with the rest of my family. So we had a number of conversations around that prior to me taking on the business, in which case on one day he finished his employment with the family structure, and on the following day he started his employment with me.
Wow.
And some of those conversations included his length of service with the family, did that finish when he finished working for the family, or did it continue working with me for long service leave and sick leave and holidays and what have you, and superannuation? So these conversations all needed to be had. So these are questions. Will come up, generally get referred to as, oh look, we've discussed that, but was it written down? Is there a document that actually applies to this conversation? The worst thing is if you don't have a document.
I think that's one of the advantages of the booklet, is you actually get a document. You've actually got something you can write your answers in. When you are a family business, quite often, John, it is mum and dad or husband and wife, and maybe it's a son and daughter who's now taken over, or maybe it's a son who's married or a daughter who's married. What recommendations do you have for that? Because quite often in my business, that you would ask me, well, who else knows? And I would say, well, Kathy, my wife, knows, and you would say, but you two travel together. So one gets hit by a bus. The likelihood is that the two. How do you help families address that issue or that risk part of who they're actually going to have as their backup?
We have to have lots of conversations about that, Mike. Backups in family businesses, policies of travelling together. Even large corporates will have company policies where they won't let more than one or two board members travel on a plane together commercially, because of the dangers that are inherent. There's a mining company, Sundance, in Australia, that the whole board was on a light plane, a jet, in Africa that flew into the ground, crashed. The whole board died in that accident, and the business probably would have collapsed had the previous chairman, only recently who had left the business, not been in Australia and been able to step up and take on the business.
Wow.
So that kind of policy is something that needs to be decided upon by every business. We don't like talking in family businesses. We don't like talking about, well, what happens when you die? What are we going to do? Because it's not really a pleasant conversation to have, but it's a very necessary conversation to have.
Is that when you find third-party advisors like yourself, who are skilled in this, can sit in a room and guide people through these types of booklets and the hit by a bus questions, that they can help temper some of that, say, emotion that might cloud things?
Yes, very definitely. An impartial, unemotional third party to help move the conversation from sticking points where, oh no, I want to look after this, or no, I don't trust you to look after that, may or may not come up. Or it can be, I'm too heartbroken to even think about what we do over the next 2 or 3 months. I'm going to need time to breathe, to get my thoughts in order. What are we going to do in those circumstances? Who are the people that we trust? And if there's 2 or 3 or 4 children, to have those conversations is very important, especially without the emotion. When the tragedy might strike, having the conversation prior to the tragedy will have a different outcome compared to what will happen if the outcome is very fresh and already passed, and you have to make very big decisions. The outcomes will be very different.
John, this booklet you've produced, how much are you charging for it?
This is a free document. You can download it off my website, johnbroons.com, www.johnbroons.com. There's a landing page, and all I ask from you is your email address. And you're welcome to download it, read it, put it in your pocket, use it as your checklist, and please start asking the family the questions.
And if people get stuck, do you offer consultations or help them through that process yourself, John?
I do. I'm always available. My mobile number is 0433 131 070. It's generally on. If I don't answer the phone, it's probably because I'm in a meeting.
Talking about if you were hit by a bus.
If you were hit by a bus. So you can call me anytime or send questions to john@johnbroons.com.